We talk a lot about this transgender thing, and some of it, the fact that a biological male was recognized at the White House yesterday with an award for International Women's Day, a woman of courage. I mean, it's the stuff that Saturday Night Live used to be made of. Of course, now Saturday Night Live has kind of bought into all that. But it's not even really funny. It's shocking, and it's dangerous. There is a spiritual element to this that we cannot miss. And this is, as I said, being foisted upon our children and leading them down a dark, destructive path. We need to be informed on just what is at stake here in terms of our children and what is driving it. Joining me now to talk about this is Dr. Jeff Myers, president of Summit Ministries. As I mentioned earlier, Jeff has just published a new book on this topic. Jeff, welcome back to the program.
Tony, great to be back with you. I'm sorry we have to talk about a subject like this, but it's really important for Americans to know truth and that there is a serious attack on truth.
Well, and when you've got people that are just acting as if truth does not exist, we have to talk about it. We have to know the foundation of that truth, and we have to equip people to defend it.
Sometimes it feels like the transgender issue is reality's last stand because a postmodern viewpoint in universities for many years has tried to convince students that truth, capital T, does not exist, that we all just socially construct our own truths. But biological realities such as male and female have always stood in the way of them making that message complete. So if you can get people to believe there's no real difference between males and females, then, well, you can convince them of anything at that point. People are open just to blatant indoctrination. So that's what we're talking about in the ebook. We want people to know that this is not only a movement, it is an industry that is profit-seeking, and it is an ideology that is power-seeking. This is not about children who have identity struggles. That's not new. Right. It's about a serious attempt to undermine, really, America.
So how can folks get a copy, before we get too far into this, a copy of Exposing the Gender Lie?
Exposing the Gender Lie is available at summit.org/protect. That is available as a free download. We're making it available for free because we really want this message to get out right away. If you're a parent or a grandparent and this has come up in your home, which I can guarantee you it has, then you can read this ebook to understand what is going on.
What are some of the points that you expose in this book? Because you're absolutely right, Jeff. I get calls from people. We're pointing them to different resources. We have some resources, but this is an issue that more and more parents and grandparents are coming face to face with.
Well, Tony, in the ebook, we talk, first of all, about how this is a medical scandal. Second, we talk about its institutional capture. And then the third, we talk about the attack on language. And then finally, because most of the people who are interested in this topic right now are people of some faith, maybe not deep faith, but they're just Americans who are concerned and who have a Christian background somehow. We talk about a biblical view, how the biblical view of male and female and the biological view of male and female are in harmony with one another. I think that probably the most shocking revelations are going to be the medical scandal, but I'm happy to talk about any of them.
Well, I want to talk about the last point you brought up, because I think that's very important as believers, because one of the things I see happening is that there are parents who know the Bible. They've grown up in the church. They know what Jesus said in Matthew 19. Have you not read from the beginning that God created them male and female? So Jesus wasn't confused about gender. He knew that there were just two. And so parents are thinking, wow, man, I have to, either I've got to accept what my child is doing and celebrate it, or I have to walk away from my faith. Which is it? And so many of them are just kind of walking away from their faith, or at least they're downplaying it. And so you cannot be a follower of Christ and not believe what he says. But part of this is the conflation of the idea that to love is to affirm. And that's not the case. We are to love, especially our children, but we're to love everybody. In fact, I think one of the things that has to be corrected, not from us, but from the left's narrative, is that those children that are drawn into this whole transgender ideology and have gone through, unfortunately, some of these surgeries and treatments. We love them. We want them to be free and to find the fullness of life, but they have to recognize that's not how God created them.
Well, there's so much there, Tony. Genesis 1, the very first chapter of the first book of the Bible says that God made human beings in his image. And I want everybody to know you have tremendous value as an image bearer of God. But immediately following that, God says, I made you in my image, male and female. The biological reality is there's 6,500 cataloged differences between males and females. Every single cell of your body, with the possible exception of your cells of sexual reproduction, it's stamped XX if you're a woman, XY if you're a man. And so the biological reality is presented right there in Genesis chapter 1. And it's presented as a positive thing. You were not born in the wrong body. You were born male or female on purpose. And males and females are designed to harmonize with one another to make humanity better. That's the core of the biblical message that often gets lost because sometimes Christians end up when you hear things like, well, you're just attacking trans kids or your child is going to commit suicide, even though these are factually incorrect things, they're scary.
Yeah, that's what we've talked about a lot because the studies, actually what we've seen come out, and part of the scandal in Missouri, in St. Louis, or the whistleblower there actually showed that it was the kids, the minors that went through the surgeries that were more prone to suicide or attempts at that than those who were just wrestling with their gender dysphoria.
Well, the latest evidence on this is that children who go through the medical transition, which is the natural course of treatment, it is all very choreographed. If a child is diagnosed gender dysphoric, they will be pushed toward medical treatment. If they go through that, the suicide rate is 19 times higher. Now, the latest studies on this, January of 2023, in a very prestigious psychological journal, reviewed 140 different studies and said that what's really going on here is a cover-up of childhood trauma. And often childhood trauma is caused by sexual abuse.
Right.
Often it's caused by, early exposure to pornography, maybe divorce or other adverse childhood experiences. And all of that gets left unaddressed when someone says, here, just take this medicine instead.
Well, and Jeff, the problem is that we're seeing more states moving to prohibit therapy in terms of even talking through these experiences of trauma. I mean, look, the natural inclination of a woman who has, or a girl that's been abused, been taken advantage of, is that there's a hatred toward, or even if it's not acknowledged, this is where the therapy comes in, they want to do anything they can possibly do to prevent that from occurring again. And part of that sometimes is taking on a masculine identity. So those are issues that arrive from a fallen culture, but it's like we're locking these kids into a destructive path by not even allowing them to have help other than this one-way street to desperation, discouragement, and despair through this transgender treatment and experimentation.
That's right. Well, you don't mutilate the body to heal the mind. And one of the things we reveal in this ebook, I think people are going to find incredibly shocking, is the medical industry has been in on this for almost 15 years. So long before Americans were paying attention to this, transgender activists had taken over the medical industry, arranged the standards of care such that doctors and therapists who don't recommend gender affirming care, which is what it is euphemistically called, can actually be in legal and professional danger. That's part of the problem. So children are being moved toward these incredible manipulations. They're being victimized by an industry and an ideology that has nothing in mind except profit and power, and the kids here are the victims.
So, folks, you can get a copy of this ebook, Exposing the Gender Lie. Maybe you haven't experienced that with your kids or grandkids, but I can assure you that someone is going to encounter this and they're going to ask questions. It's a great resource to have available. Again, Jeff, give them we've got a link at tonyperkins.com, but give them the direct link again.
Yeah, the direct link is summit.org/protect. You can download that book. You can forward that link to anybody you think might be interested. It will create a lot of controversy, but we have more than 100 pieces of documentation in this ebook to demonstrate that what we are saying is so. We've analyzed all of these studies that say that children are going to commit suicide if they aren't allowed to take puberty blockers or use cross-sex hormones or have surgery. We've taken apart all of these things to try to present the truth because we want families to know you don't have
Yeah.
to submit to this regime just because somebody thought it up.
So a few questions here. Number one, the motive. What's driving this? Let's start with just the medical industry. Is it driven by profit, or is there something else here, or is it a combination of things?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. There's profit, there is power. Initially, transgender medicine was guided by a belief among people in the LGBTQ community that transgender people were not getting access to medical care. Either they were embarrassed about their sexual history or they just didn't fit into existing categories, and then they were having all kinds of health issues. But it very quickly became about profit. Now, if a child takes puberty blockers, that's going to cost up to $30,000 a year. And the parents are going to have to pay for that, or Medicare or Medicaid or the insurance companies are going to have to pay for that. But you take that times the 42,000 children who were diagnosed last year as gender dysphoric, and you're looking at a billion, maybe a multi-billion dollar industry. And Tony, you spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill. You know how healthcare their lobbyists are everywhere. Last year, the healthcare industry spent $1.5 million per member of Congress lobbying them. And so they have a very strong profit motive to make sure the laws all go their way.
And we've seen how the left has taken over a lot of these associations to where, as you mentioned earlier, that if a counselor, psychologist, doctor in any way kind of bucks the trend, they are in trouble, because you have these medical associations, counseling associations adopting these radical policies that force, it's a funnel. It just forces kids into this, and the medical industry has to treat it.
Yes. Well, if parents are struggling with something like this, I would recommend talking to a therapist who focuses on trauma. They can take a simple test. It's called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences Test, see if there might be childhood trauma and address the underlying trauma. What we're finding, and the transgender industry does not want to hear this, but 75 to 95% of kids who have the underlying trauma resolved, their experiences of gender dysphoria dissipate.
So, speaking of the issue of trauma, you mentioned that it can be personally being traumatized by sexual exploitation or being a victim of that, pornography. Is that a contributing factor to this explosion that we've seen now of young people identifying as transgender?
I think so. I think we would say gender dysphoria diagnoses might be a comorbidity of deeper issues, maybe depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, all of those kinds of things that are very, very serious and need to be addressed. But when you say, oh, you can take a pill or you can take these shots and you can become a girl or you can become a boy, you're confusing and complicating the issue. So that's just really the message that I want parents to know. Your child was not born in the wrong body. They have the body that God designed them to have. And we need to understand that our society's wide acceptance of the sexual revolution has put young girls in a very vulnerable position. The number of young women now who are saying they have been sexually abused is shocking and extraordinary. And depression and anxiety naturally follow from those kinds of experiences, as well as a lot of self-blame because they're being told by their abusers, you made me do this. And then on top of all of this, they're being confused in school. Maybe I would be better off if I was a boy, then I could protect myself.
Right. Bottom line is, this should be a warning light when a child has this gender dysphoria. You need to see what is driving it underneath. Exposing the gender lie, Dr. Jeff Myers, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tony.